Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome. This is Snackbox coming to you from a brand new location. I'm actually here in Closet Studio. This is sort of a makeshift space here. Really excited to be here talking with you all. We're going to talk a lot about all of your questions about the Colorado Trail. We're going to talk all about strategy, getting ready for all sorts of different challenges you're going to face this year. And it's a very unique year on the Colorado Trail, specifically because of the snowpack and how heavy it is this year. We haven't seen snow like this in a long time. So that's going to present quite a bit of challenges for a lot of folks heading out, and especially those folks who are heading out on the typical starting date of July 1st. So as we go through this, I'll do my best to be keeping an eye there on the chat box. So if you have any questions that you want me to answer, feel free to put them in. I'll do my best to mark them, but you may have to put them up a couple of different times if I don't get to them in the say 10 minutes or so. If I'm not on top of it by then, please just be patient with me. And if you think of a question later, I'll just remind you all that you can indeed send me messages on Instagram at Backcountry Champion. I'll be happy to talk those over. I actually just scheduled a conversation with someone who is planning to head out for a few days, and they just wanted to have a phone call and talk over some of the different challenges that they're going to face and come up with some ideas and approaches for the trail. So if that's something of interest to you, by all means, let me know. I really love this trail, and I'm happy to help get you out there and find ways to make sure that you are plugged in with that trail and having the best experience possible, because there's nothing that could be a better experience for folks than going out and feeling prepared and feeling ready. So be sure that you click that like and subscribe button. We're getting really close to that 1,400 mark, which is a little bit bananas to me. I think we're about 5 people away. So if you haven't clicked it yet, smash that, buddy. Yeah, that's when you know you're a YouTuber, is when you say smash that button. So smash it, do what you got to do. Now, I did get a couple of questions already on the Facebook page, so I'll sort of pepper those in unless we have other questions coming in. The very first question that I got, I promised I would deal with this one very first. One of the questions I got here was, how do I keep my batteries charged while on trail? And presumably what we're talking about here are things like cell phones, keeping those charged, maybe even battery packs. Some of you may have some nicer cameras. I took a drone the last 2 years, so thinking about that. Batteries can be a real challenge for folks, but what I think is actually important, and sort of the first piece of information that's pertinent not just to batteries, but to any piece of gear that you're taking out there, is know that you are not going to be in the wilderness forever, right? So you will actually have plenty of opportunity to charge your batteries every 4th to 6th day, give or take, depending on how long you are going out there. But very few people are out on the trail for more than 6 days in a given stretch. That's pretty rare for folks. So you'll have lots of opportunities to charge. So let's start with first what I've done in the past, sort of the minimal approach, and that is just your cell phone. How do you keep that charged? A couple of things you're going to want to do. Number one, obviously, you're going to charge it up and put it on airplane mode. And it also is probably a good idea at this point to consider something like the data book or a map instead of the Far Out app, because if you're just trying to preserve that cell phone power, that's typically the best way to go, is to make sure that you don't use it for anything that's not absolutely necessary. So no music, no text messages. You're just basically having it there to turn on when you get to cell coverage to check things. So maybe when you're like at a pass, like the one behind me here is Hope Pass at the start of the Collegiate East, you might turn on your phone when you get up to those to see if you can get some messages in. That's a pretty decent strategy for a lot of folks. And honestly, I think there's a lot of value to just taking that very minimal approach. Now, one of the best ways you can preserve your batteries, not just for your phone, but maybe for a GoPro or a camera, something of the sort, is make sure you keep the batteries warm and don't turn it on when you are first getting up in the morning, when it's cold. So if your batteries are cold for whatever reason, I don't know the science of it, but it will absolutely just burn it up really quickly. So wait until it's warm, maybe even sleep with it in your sleeping bag. In fact, a lot of newer sleeping bags are coming with cell phone pockets and zipper pockets in them to put your phone in. Very good idea there. So make sure that you're thinking of that and just keeping those batteries warm. That will keep the batteries going for a long time. And quite honestly, if you had just a good phone and you turned it off and only turned it on when you absolutely needed it, you could make that last probably about a month, really. I mean, you're not going to need a whole lot of battery power, because most of the trail, you're not going to actually have all of those different, you're not going to have all of those different cell signals to basically connect to. So you're going to be off grid anyway. Now, if you are in a position where maybe you're a little nervous about that, or maybe you have, say, a Zoleo or a GPS device and you're a little nervous about that, you can go with sort of the battery bank, the Anchor battery pack, or you can even go with one of the Anchor solar chargers. What I can say is that I took both in different years, and I found the solar charger to not really work that well. Not because it wasn't effective, because it would work. But what happened is when you put it out, when you put your cell phone, for example, under the solar charger, it got so hot that your phone would stop charging because it's sort of getting blasted. And even if you tuck the phone under the solar charger, it still heated the phone up so much that the phone would stop charging as a sort of preventative measure. So I do prefer the Anchor packs, the sort of Anchor packs. They are heavy, so that's not ideal. So I would take the smallest one you think you could get away with, and that's a really good way to go from there. So I would basically, if I were the average hiker, I would take a small battery pack, if anything. Make sure you're turning off your phone and really being protective of it, and maybe take that data book. And I really do swear by that data book. So I think that that's really the best route to go, is kind of minimize everything and take a smaller pack. That said, remember, every 6 days or so, that's really what you're really working with here. Is you're just trying to get through 6 days. So don't think of it as, how do I keep my batteries charged for a month? Think 6 days at most. Let me pause for a minute. I want to say hello to a few folks here. It's good to see Try Duty. It's great to see Rolf. Well, it's great to see you both, right? Wouldn't that be funny if I was like, it's pretty good to see you, Try Duty. Rolf, it's great to see you. Great to see you all. It's also great to see hashtag there in the comments. Dave is here from Off Grid. Dave does some great videos on gear recently. Try Duty on the Trail is doing some great videos up in Michigan. He and I had a great chance to go winter camping. So if you've not seen his video of our winter trip up in the Manistee, that was just one of the most fun winter snow trips I've ever had. And then also be sure you follow hashtag over there at Tangent Trails, because he is taking off in the Wiminuche. So he'll be hitting up some of the more beautiful parts of the Colorado Trail this summer, and he'll be doing some great videos out there as well. We got Reclaiming Ruth here. She's also, if I'm remembering correctly here, Ruth is heading out to finish up the Colorado Trail, sort of do the last half of it. And last year did half of the trail. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ruth. I think that's right, that you went all the way to Monarch. And so the Nightcore pack looks great. And then also it's great to see Elderberry here. Elderberry and I met on the top of the 10-mile range, and just a really great person to know. So be keeping an eye out there. Andrew, great to see you as well. I'll get to your question next. And then also, Chris, I see your question as well. So just want to acknowledge that is there. And also Jason over there at All Terrain Coffee and Camping. So thank you all for showing up. It's great. These just make my day. So thank you all. So basically, I would go with just a little, the smallest pack you think you can get away with. And just know that there will be spots along the trail that you can pick it up. One thing that I also recommend, and this is not just for the battery packs, this is for any piece of gear, is take whatever you think you're going to need and then be ready to mail it back at Breckenridge. Or if you think you can get away without it, go without it to Breckenridge. And then if you need it, you'll be able to pick it up in Breckenridge, because they have everything you need there. From, Frisco has a Walmart. There's an REI in Dillon. There are plenty of stores where you can pick up stuff if you decide that you should have brought something and didn't. And there are post offices where you can mail stuff back if you decided you took something and want to send it back, you're not using it. What I'd also say is, basically, when you get there to Breckenridge, if you look in your backpack and there's anything you haven't used that's not on that 10 essentials list, send it back. You don't need it. So this is where a lot of people send back things like, the Kindle readers. Maybe you send back some books. Maybe you send back a deck of cards, that kind of thing. It's really common for those to go back there as well. Great. So let's go back here. I've got a comment here. I got a question. We've got here from Andrew. He's talking about doing the Collegiate East at Monarch Pass and meeting friends at Twin Lakes. I think this is a great idea. What I will say, and this is also going to be pertinent there to Chris's question that's coming up in a minute about starting the loop in July. The very last part of the Colorado Trail to melt, the very last part is actually, it's kind of tucked away back in here. It's Lake Ann Pass, and it is scary. Scary is maybe not the right word. It's a little ooky even when there's not snow on the ground. So I think in that case, if I were in a situation where I'm starting a little bit earlier and I wanted to get in sort of that 160-mile stretch, I might actually, in July, consider doing something like maybe Lake City to Durango instead. And again, pushing back as late as you can, because it may not just be the snow, that there's a high likelihood that the snow is going to create avalanches that will push down trees that will slow you up as well. That said, if you can make it work, I think this is a great idea. I love the idea of saving the West for the end. I think that's a really great way to go. The West is among my favorite places on the entire Colorado Trail. So if you can swing it, I think that's a great plan. I love that idea. Parking will be a little bit tricky because I don't believe you're allowed to park at Monarch Pass. But that said, what you could do is park at Marshall Pass. It's just harder to get back to your car, or you could sort of start at a different place that's a little closer. So maybe you don't start exactly at Monarch Pass. You start maybe some other trailhead that's in that vicinity. And again, the data book is going to help you figure out exactly where that might be. And Andrew, you're spot on there. Lake Ann Pass is probably, I don't know, it's probably top 3 favorite place on the entire trail in my books. I think it's just absolutely incredible. Other folks who've been there, I think Rolf, I don't remember if Rolf went east or west, but he can chime in and speak to that as well. Rolf completed the trail in 2021, so he can certainly chime in on that one as well. And then here, first week of July, this one, if you are going to start in the first week of July, you absolutely have to do the east first. And then I would start at Interlachen at Twin Lakes, and then make your way south. And where you're going to start running into trouble is really going to be when you get to that Collegiate West point. I don't personally recommend it. And the reason is that again, that Lake Ann Pass, typical years, we don't expect it to clear until about the second week of July. And so if you're starting it in the first week of July, you'd have to hike awfully slowly to get to the west when the snow is clear enough to be safe. Now, again, there are people who hike it in the winter and do a great job and are able to do it, but I don't have the balance or technical skill or the gear, because you are talking about post holing, which for miles, right? It's really going to be really tough. A couple of others. That said, don't give up on an early July hike, right? So maybe what you do is just reroute a little bit. So you could do, say, the first 170 miles to Twin Lakes of the Colorado Trail during that stretch the first week of July. I think that would be pretty doable with minimal snow packer coverage. So you're basically, it's a really tough one. I know that it's really a bummer for a lot of folks, but it's hard to safely say that it's a good idea to go out there when you get to that Lake Ann Pass. It can be really, really tough. Ruth and Rolf, if you could chime in too about a little bit about sort of what it's like to climb Hope Pass and Lake Ann Pass, and then sort of your thoughts on what that would be like if there were big snow patches, then that might be useful too. But Chris, if you want some alternatives, again, feel free to hit me up on Instagram and we can talk over different ideas for where that would work early in July. Or, if you can push it back. I don't know what your situation is or sort of the initial place where you're going, why that first week is important to you, whether it's schedule or maybe it's just that's sort of a symbolic marker for you. But let me know and we can talk over some alternatives as well. Good to see Mo there. That's Brian in the chat there. Mo did the CT as well in 2021. He and I had quite a bit of great conversations coming down to the Carson Saddle there in the segment 23-ish. And you sort of skyrocket straight down this road that it's a forest road, but it's pretty scary because it's so gravelly and I'm pretty clumsy. So I almost fell a number of different times there. All right, let's go back here and take a look. I got a couple of other questions. We've got, this is one of my favorite questions. I want to branch this out a little bit. I want us to go a little bigger than just segment. I want us to go bigger than segment 9, because one of the questions we do get a lot is this question about mosquitoes, right? How you handle mosquitoes. And the good news is, generally speaking, the mosquitoes are not bad on the trail most of the time, right? So most of the time they're not bad. Segment 9 after Tennessee Pass is bad. And I don't know exactly what's going on there, why the Holy Cross Wilderness specifically is so sort of rife with mosquitoes, but they are pretty bad. And here's the real rub with it, or sort of the mental problem with the mosquitoes in this segment, is that when you start getting bitten, you're going to be on this big climb up this. You sort of make the climb up this saddle, or on the in that segment, and so basically you're gonna. It's really hard mentally because you are climbing, and anytime you stop, the mosquitoes swarm, so you don't really get a good chance to rest. And then when you get to camp, you just sort of want to rest and cook your food, but then the mosquitoes really sort of set in. But that said, they are not as bad as what I saw in Yosemite. So Yosemite was just absolutely one of the most nightmarish mosquito filled hikes. Beautiful nonetheless, and I would still 100% go back there. And the same is true of segment 9. I would still go straight through there, because the Holy Cross Wilderness, when you enter it, when you get to the place where the sign is, it's just absolutely stunning. It's one of those photos, or sort of photo shots, that I would describe as being like quintessential Colorado, right? So it's got everything in that. It's got the tree line mountain peak and the granite, and it's got the aspen trees and pine trees all blended with a creek. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. So it's really, they're bad in that segment, but they're not so bad that I wouldn't go hike there again. But you definitely need to have something in place. So whether that's treating your clothes with permethrin, taking on DEET if you're comfortable with that. Maybe you're going to, I know that a lot of people use dryer sheets. That can work as well if you have long sleeves, but just be ready for that situation, because you don't want to have sort of a bad go in that area, especially that early on the trail. For those of you who are new, the first sort of 100 miles or so are tough mentally, because your body is still adjusting. You don't really have those expansive views like you'll get later in the trail really frequently. You will have some expansive views, but not nearly the frequency. So the mental game early is very hard, and that segment 9 falls into that. So just be ready for that as well. But that said, after you get through that, typically you're going to be fine. Not a whole lot to worry about. In fact, I slept under a tarp in 2020 for 200 miles of the trail and had no problem whatsoever. And that included going through that segment 9. So it can be done, right? Let's go here. We've got Blades by Claw. Does Hope Pass hold snow for a while too? I believe so. It's not nearly as late as Lake Ann Pass, and it's specifically because of the way that it sits. And you kind of see behind me here that the sun just straight down on it, whereas Lake Ann Pass kind of has a shadow. So when the sun comes up, it's got that slope that the sun doesn't hit. So the snow can be there even much later than that. And it's got this sort of cornice situation. And that's why I'm really so cautious about sending people this way before the snow melts on Hope Pass, or not Hope Pass, I'm sorry, Lake Ann Pass. Now, Hope Pass does seem to hold some of the snow, but the difference really is that Hope Pass is such a steep descent. So behind me, it really rocket ships down, where in 2020, I think 4 of the 5 people I was hiking with slipped and fell at some point coming down that pass. So it's a little bit hard to begin with. And then you add snow into the mix, and it can be really tough there. So this one is, so this photo here was taken, I think it's maybe 100 yards from the crest of Hope Pass. Now let's go here. I haven't read this question yet, so I hope it's appropriate. Beth, welcome. Newbie hiker here. I know rain pants are a bit of a preference, planning to bring them as warmth and laundry layer on top of rain. This is a great question. If you can skip rain pants, and that one, I've hiked without rain pants. My partner does not hike without rain pants. She takes them. And so really a personal preference. And I think it kind of comes back to what I was mentioning a little while ago about sort of battery packs, but take what you think is most likely to work for you, and then reassess at Breckenridge, Frisco area, and decide if it's working for you and if you need to send them back. I've hiked without rain pants because typically rain gear is so hot for me anyway that I just sweat through it anyhow. So it takes a lot for me to put on rain gear. And when I do put on rain gear, if it's bad enough that it's going to actually require rain gear, I'm far more likely to set my tent up for an hour or so and let the storm pass before moving on. So rain gear is pretty important to have something in place, but generally speaking, you will be in a situation where in sort of dire straits, you can set up your tent. And so tough call. I tend to be really hot. I know other people tend to be really cold really easily. So that's how I would make my decision. As long as you keep your other pants dry, you're good. So make sure that however you pack them in your bag, they don't get wet. And so that's really kind of how I would go there. I hope that's helpful. And so let's talk here. Scott, I love this question here. Water availability late August on the south end of the trail. This one is, there are two spots where this can be a little bit tricky, right? So there's one spot where there's like I want to say it's like a 7-mile stretch before whatever that lake is. Somebody remind me. There's the lake where you go off trail half a mile straight down. It's past Tank 7 Creek. Must be in segment 16, I believe. So there are a couple of stretches where the water can be tough. In your specific situation, if you have the Far Out app, that's a really good way to go, specifically because you will have people who will be updating the water conditions. I think this year specifically, I can't promise, of course, we're still looking 3-4 months out, but I would say that most water is going to be running given how much snow we've gotten this year. I think it's actually, that's why August is going to be a great year. This is a great year for August hikers specifically. And then Jerry there mentions also Taylor Lake. That is another spot, Jerry, the Taylor Lake. That's a 14-mile stretch without water before Taylor Lake at the end of segment 27. So you'll have a 14-mile stretch. There is an intermittent stream that does run. That one, I think for you, Scott, will be game over. I don't think the intermittent stream will be going. So depending on where you are on that hike, you can always consider, staying near the first water source. I don't remember the name of it, but then it's a creek, and I should know this one, but it's then 14 miles to Taylor Lake. And so you can sort of dry camp that night. But I think in your case, you're in good shape. If you do get the data book, and this goes for everybody, if you get the data book, anywhere it says water, the little graphic that shows the cup of water, the more full it is, the more likely it is to be running that year. So if it is a full glass, it's always going to be there. So Taylor Lake will be a full glass of water. If it's a half glass, that means it might dry up later in the season. If it's sort of the sketchy little zigzag, chances are good, or an exclamation point, chances are good that might be dry by then. I think you're going to be in great shape. We've got here, Rolf is chiming in and says he carried rain pants on 3 through hikes with lots of rain, hardly ever used them, too cumbersome and sweaty. Sun umbrella though for rain as much as sun. That's a great one too, great alternative. And I love that idea, Rolf. Specifically, the sun umbrella is great, and Girl Plus Dog Adventures will tell you that it's really helpful for hailstorms and really helpful for segment 2 when you are exposed for a long time. Having a sun umbrella is a great idea for you to have that in the works as well. But yeah, I agree. Typically speaking, I would probably, if I were Beth, I would probably try going without the rain pants and seeing how they go. But here we have some dissent here. So Ruth and Rolf are probably going to have a battle royal. They are going to send a bunch of mean text messages to each other over this one. Just kidding, everybody. Rain pants came in super handy there for waiting out storms and to keep warm, and wind pants for that, which can be lighter. And that's a great idea as well, especially when you get later in the trail. There's a lot of wind exposure, so making sure that you have something like that in place. And the rain skirt is also a great idea. I think so Mo here used a rain skirt. That's actually a really great idea too, because the rain skirt does breathe a lot better, and it's not nearly as difficult to put on as, say, a poncho, which I've used a poncho in the past, and that can be just if you want to see somebody rage quit, put me in the woods without somebody to help me put on a poncho, and you will see me just absolutely lose my ever-loving mind, because they are so hard to put on with a backpack. I know I've seen people do it. I don't know what it is. I'm just not able to do it myself. So ponchos can be really useful, but a rain skirt, I like that idea as well. And then here, Girl Plus Dog Adventures also completed the trail in 2021. She mentions here about rain pants but never wore them, and then had the DWR treatment, and that worked out better. DWR is basically sort of a Scotchgard kind of water treatment, so it'll with the exception of getting fully submerged or something, a lot of the water will sort of roll off, kind of bead off, BEAD off. And that's a good thing to know, specifically if you're planning to hike through the weather. And because you're moving any water that beads on your pants, you'll be able to sort of shake that off as well. Cool. Now we've got another question here. If you have any other questions, feel free to shoot them over. I did get a question here earlier today about going east or west around the collegiates. And typically speaking, this one is generally a no-brainer for me, that go west if it's late enough in the season that it's clear. Couple of reasons for that. Again, personal preference. If you want to go east, I can't argue with that. It's the original route, but the west is about the same difficulty. I don't think it is measurably more difficult. In fact, I think mentally it's a lot easier because you get views like this, where over on the east, you don't tend to get quite the same level of views. You tend to do a lot of work. And then when you get to the top of the views, you're still below tree line. So a lot of the views can be obscured. A lot of people disagree with me on that, though. So if you do disagree with me on that, feel free to drop that in the comments as well. That it can be, a lot of people really like the east. But as you're making this decision here, I would say the one thing that I would factor into this, or the one thing that I would take away as a factor, is this sort of myth that the east is somehow easier. It's not. It's just not. So Hope Pass behind me is what I consider to be the hardest climb on the entire CT. The first 3 climbs on the collegiate east are what I consider to be the second, third, and fourth hardest climbs, because they are just relentless. It's hot, it's exposed. Could have just been the time that I did it, but I've done that. I've done both the east and west twice. And if given the choice, if I can make it through without snow danger, and that's important, if I can make it through without snow danger, I'm going west. If I can't, I'm still hiking the east. There are some great spots on the east that are really beautiful. You've got the Harvard Lakes. South Fooses Creek is really beautiful as well. And then you also have the Mount Princeton Hot Springs, and going into Buena Vista is really great. Girl Plus Dog Adventures will tell you as well that there's a great pancake shop there in Buena Vista called Jan's. She loves it, just will not stop talking about Jan's anytime we go anywhere near Buena Vista. She just, I mean, it's getting to be a problem at this point how much she likes those pancakes. So that's that. Be sure, if you have any other questions here, we're getting close actually to sort of having plenty of questions, or getting to the end of the questions, and I'm happy to stay on as long as we need to. But also, if you don't have any questions, I'm happy to. I feel like this is teacher mode. Like, if you don't have questions, you can go home for the day. And I don't mean that in any sort of hostile way here. Recommend pushing to Breck for first resupply, or hitching to Jefferson or Bailey first, coming from sea level. Concerned about starting slow. This is a great question. I love this one, Castaway. So here, this is a great question because Bailey is, there are 2 options for getting to Bailey. And so I actually kind of like the idea for you specifically. I think stopping there in Bailey is a great idea. And look up it's called the Linwood Hostel, or it's 2 bridges. It was once called Linwood, Lyn Wood Hostel, or bunkhouse, or cabins. It's Linwood in Bailey. If you look up Lyn Wood, you'll be able to find it. It might be 2 bridges now, but they run a shuttle and they will pick you up either at the Rolling Creek Trailhead, which is about 8 miles from Bailey down a dirt forest road, or they'll pick you up in Kenosha Pass and they'll run you back. And the shuttle, I think, is $20 to $25 each way, which is an absolute steal. It's a great idea because if you do that, then what you do is you set up a situation where you start the trail with 3 days of food in your backpack. And that's terrific, because the number one way you can cut food weight, or one of the two number one ways, is to have fewer days between resupplies. So Bailey will be a great chance for you just to get out there, make some miles, start getting comfortable, then have a ride secured where you know you're going to get into a hostel for a cheap night and back to the trail. And if you feel like stopping at the end of segment 3 is too early, you can always go all the way to Kenosha Pass, which is about 72 miles down trail, which would be for most people probably 4 or 5 days in. They'll pick you up there as well, or you can hitch. But either way works great depending on how you're doing as a hiker. Breckenridge is also what I would consider sort of a must stop. You just gotta stop there in Breckenridge or Frisco, because it's far too easy to get from that trail to resupply at grocery stores, get to a hostel or a hotel. REI, et cetera, and get back. So Breck Frisco area is a must stop. So however you do it, I would say even if you stop in Bailey, you're in a really good spot there too. So here, let's go ahead and talk Leadville or Salida for resupply, or maybe a zero. Great question there. Hashtag. Personally, I think Salida is just a dynamite town. It's also on US Highway 50. So it's very easy to catch a hitch there to town. And Salida is an important one because the next 100 miles or so Highway 50 is about mile 252 if you're on the east. It's about mile 264 if you're on the west. And so from that point to mile 357, where you get to the highway that goes into Lake City, there's really nothing. It's very, very difficult. So I think you need to go, I think you'll need to go into Salida most likely anyway. And so Salida is probably my choice, especially because when you're getting into Leadville, that's only maybe 30 miles or so past Copper Mountain. So I don't think you necessarily need to go into Leadville, but I do like Leadville. I think it's a pretty fun little town. But Salida has got a lot more. There's some good pizza as well. As Girl Plus Dog Adventures points out here, that you can't get a Melly in Salida, just good pizza. And fun fact, most of the time you can't even get a Melly in Leadville. So again, Salida is probably the best way to go here. Ruth here has a really pertinent question, and this is a shocker to most people, because when you get in that segment 18 and 19, the sort of flatter segment, the good news is you're going to do this road walk that's super flat. It's just a really, really flat walk. I think you have about, on average, 100 feet of elevation gain per mile as you go through the 27 miles of those two segments. But there are cows in the water. So when you get to Lujan Creek, Lujan, which is at the very start after you cross the highway, at that point you run into this sort of area where cows are everywhere. And so for me, I like to treat my water with the drops. So I use drops, but it's pretty gross, right? So you've got this sort of situation where cows might be peeing in it, or maybe they're stomping around so much that it's cloudy. So here, it's pretty gross, right? So my personal recommendation is when you get to Lujan Creek, which is generally clear, it's at the very start, you'll cross a highway. So you'll come down this sort of forest road. They'll be doing some logging and come down a forest road, and then you'll cross a highway. Gosh, I wish I knew the name of it. I think it might be 149, but it's a highway, and you'll kind of walk down the highway 100 yards and then turn left and go into that segment. In that segment, right away, you're going to come to clear water. Stock up on all you can, because the water that's 9 miles in is the water that's typically pretty gross. It's Highway 118. Thank you, details. So the water right away is really clear. Camel up, get as much as you can, and make sure you have enough to go past that 9-mile stop. That's the one typically where the water is muddy, super gross. It's not water that, even if you can treat it, you want to drink. Now, if you treat it, it's fine. So don't skip that and then die of dehydration, but know that one's coming up. But that's it's a really good question there. But really, as long as you know it's coming up in that segment, get the water from Lujan Creek right after you cross the highway, get as much as you can, and make sure you have enough to make it all the way through that section as well. So that's basically what we're dealing with there, Ruth. There is a spot. Now let's talk about this one for a minute, because this is a little bit tricky. You might want to, I don't know. It's on my water. I did a video on water special considerations. This is my favorite tip, probably the one tip that I think is the most useful for anybody. So at Spring Creek Pass, that's mile 357, you will start hiking into south of Spring Creek Pass, and you will see the Colorado Trail. It's Friends of the Colorado Trail yurt that's off to the right, and then there'll be sort of a tree line, and you'll walk across some marshy area, and then the trees have some camp spots and such. And so a lot of people will set up shop there, and then they will go back into the marshy area and try to get water out of the marsh. It's not bad water. It's not nearly as bad as the cow water, but it's pretty gross nonetheless. There'll be sort of twigs and stuff in it and dirt. I drink it, it's fine, but you can kind of go past that. So once you get into that tree line past the yurt, you won't miss it. Go about 200 yards in and listen to the left. You're going to hear fresh flowing water, and you'll kind of have to go through whatever that brush is that the moose eat. What is that? Willow. You go through some willows, and then you'll have plenty of really fresh, crisp, clear water. It's going to be, I mean, night and day difference. Really, really great. So just remember that it's 9 miles into that segment, and so it's a really good one to know here. This is an important one here, mile 266. This is segment 15, the Larspur ditch. After that water is pretty gross, Rolf, I agree with you. So just know that that's a yuck. But typically speaking, water is not something to be super concerned about, but this is where the data book comes in very handy, and the Far Out app comes in really handy, especially as the season goes on, because people will make note of it and you can look ahead. What I will say, though, is always look ahead when you're filling water, if you're using the app specifically or the data book, doesn't really matter, but make sure you look ahead and have a sense of where your next water is. And that's really, really crucial for understanding how far you can go. Because remember, I mentioned earlier that one of the best ways to lighten your pack is to plan out your food carefully. Same is true for water, that's actually the best thing you can do, is make sure you're only carrying the water you need. And that will be the cheapest. I mean, it's a free way to lighten your load. So if you fill up water and you know there's another really great, reliable source 2 miles up, you might not even carry much water, maybe half a liter or something to get you there. And that would be just fine. Jerry here also has a great idea to use a water additive, and he's out in Texas and does a lot of that desert hiking. So often some of those cow ponds are where he's getting some of that water. And I think that's a good idea. So I like to take Crystal Light, and I take Crystal Light with caffeine in it. And that's what I have often in the morning. So I'll wake up in the morning, add some Crystal Light with caffeine, start my hike, and wait until the sun really comes out. And that's when I will stop and make coffee, spread out my gear, and let it dry while I'm having my hot breakfast. So my hot breakfast is typically 2-3 hours after I start hiking for the morning. So having something to add to the water is a great idea as well. Let's go here, Adam. We've got a question about a tarp, using a pocket tarp. Actually, one of the guys that I hiked with, his name was Nomad, and he used a Hexamid pocket tarp and a bivy. And here, I think you're fine. I think if you've used this in the Eastern Sierra, this setup in the Eastern Sierra, you're golden. You're golden. So there will be a couple of spots where you might need that bug bivy, but generally speaking, that pocket tarp is just chef's kiss. That's a great choice. Don't sweat it. You're going to be fine. Segment 9 might be a little bit tough. The rest of the trip, you're likely to be in great shape. So I love that setup, and I actually think I will likely be heading into tarp territory again in the future. In fact, if you are a fan of tarps, or if you're still trying to figure out what tent setup will work best for you, check out the Gossamer Gear sale. Just all of their tents went on sale. The Gossamer Gear, the one, is on sale for like $220 right now, which is about $80 off. They also have their single tarp is $97, and their double tarp is $104. And actually, I would take the double tarp even if I was going by myself, because the weight difference is negligible and the size is small enough that I think that's a great way to go. And then here, golden sounds solid. You're perfect, man. You're golden. I'm glad to hear it. Really, really glad to hear it. Now let's talk for a few minutes. Let me take this down. I do want to talk about a couple of things just morale-wise that are useful just to know, because, when you're doing a trip like this, if you are heading out, you're going to have these highs and lows. You're going to have some times where you will feel better than you've ever felt in your entire life. Your lows will not likely be quite that low, but a couple of things that are just good philosophies to know. Number one is, remember that comfort is not necessarily the goal. You don't want to get injured, but comfort is not necessarily the goal. So if you're a little uncomfortable or gross or sore, that's okay. But to prevent that injury, do take Leukotape. So Leukotape is a tip that I give to anybody. It's about $6-7 on Amazon. It's PT tape. It's what they use in physical therapy, and it will stay on blisters. So when you start getting hot spots, put it on your blister. Make sure you take good care of it. And the reason that blister care is so important is not because, if you get a blister, that's probably not a big deal, right? Little blisters, normal, you're probably going to get a couple of those. But here's what happens is, when you get a couple of blisters, and then they start getting sore, right? Then you're going to change your gait. You're going to change the way you walk, which is going to lead to soreness or maybe even overuse injuries that you might have trained a ton beforehand. And then you get out there and you're going to have those issues. So Leukotape is great. So anytime you feel a little bit of friction, put some Leukotape on it. It will stay on your foot wherever you put it as long as you need to. Some people take Leukotape and wrap it around their trekking pole. It's a great idea as well to have some. I like to carry the whole roll because I always know somebody will be there that I can hand them Leukotape and sort of make sure that if they're having trouble with blisters, that they're in good shape. Leukotape is spelled Leuko, Leukotape. It's great if you're going with a group of people. One person carries it, everybody else is in good. It's in good. It's in good shape. Jason here heard me mention Leukotape, so he's good. And I think Jerry is actually going to be next on the list because the next tip is also carry a good bar of chocolate. Just a good bar of chocolate. And it's not for snacks, right? It's not for daily eating. It's anytime your morale starts to dip a little bit, piece of chocolate. And if you're hiking with other people, the rule I like to have is that you always make it a rule in your group that when somebody's morale dips, the other people tell them when they eat the chocolate. So if I'm getting cranky, then that's when my hiking buddy says, hey, snack box, you got to get some chocolate in your system, and it will change your morale so fast. It's really probably just a mental thing, but it's particularly good when you're with people, because what happens then is it's sort of lots of layers of really good stuff happening, right? One, it's people care about you, so they're trying to help you out. Two, you're going to have to stop and take a little bit of a breather to at least get the chocolate out. Three, you have some sugar, maybe a little bit of caffeine in it. There's a great Trader Joe's coffee and chocolate bar that I definitely recommend. I think that's a good one as well. So have some of that with you as well. And Ruth can attest to this point here that chocolate is absolutely, it's terrific. I don't know what it is. I just genuinely don't know what it is, but I think that the chocolate is it's just a move. And really, typically speaking, I have 1-2 bars of chocolate on my entire through hike. So it doesn't take a lot. It's not really hard. But here we've got 5-Star and Sage using sour gummy bears offered all around. I think this speaks really to that idea of community being part of why you feel better, because people care. That is not really about the sugar necessarily or the chocolate or whatever. It's just that idea that people care. And so here we've got also gummy bears. We've got a second for that. As Details will tell you as well, you definitely want to get that brand of gummy bears. Details, I should know this one. It's a white bag of gummy bears. They're just the absolute best. So if you'll let us know what the name of that one is. Albanese. There we go. Thank you. Albanese gummy bears. They're just, I don't know what it is. They're super soft. They're really tasty. They're just terrific. So take that into consideration. One of the other things that I think is, the sort of culprit for me not finishing a couple of the different attempts I've had at through hikes has been time. And I don't mean that I didn't have enough time, because certainly the through hike that I finished last year, I attempted a through hike last year and left in Salida. But I was pushing myself because I had this sort of arbitrary time frame in my brain that I wanted to finish in X number of days, and that can just wear on you. So time is absolutely the best resource that you can have. So make sure that you give yourself sufficient time. If you're deciding to push, my personal recommendation is to shorten the hike to where you're not pushing. And then if you go farther, great. But if not, you're in good shape as well. So don't set up a sort of an unrealistic or really tight timeline, because that can just really ruin a hike and ruin the way you feel about it and start wearing on your head and your brain, right? And here, as High Five Hikes points out, don't ever quit on a bad day. That is gospel truth right there, High Five. I think that's absolutely perfect. Do not quit on a bad day. You're going to have bad days. Don't quit on a bad day. It's just wait a day, take a 0, go into town, get some food, call your family, call somebody you care about, do stuff that brings your spirits back up, and remind yourself that, it's really fortunate that we are in positions where we're physically able, financially able, time wise, we're at a point in our life where all of these crazy different features of, or sort of characteristics of what it takes to be ready for a through hike sort of merge. So if you're planning a hike, you are so very fortunate to just be in a place to do that. So really focusing in on some of that gratitude can be really helpful as well. CT Mom, great to see you as well there. And here we've got Jason pointing out the Lifesaver sour gummies. Those are also really great. And here the Haribo sugar-free gummies. I don't know what this is about, Rolf, but what I can tell you is that I do know that sugar-free foods typically use a sugar alcohol. So that's how they end up with the sugar-free, that they sort of convert it into an alcohol. And what it does then is, I mean, for lack of a better term, you'll get the beer shits, right? So if you've ever had beer one night and then wake up the next morning with kind of diarrhea, then that's basically what the sugar-free candies and gums can do. So typically avoiding sugar-free items is a good idea, especially when you're on trail. I want to point this out here from Adam. Adam, I love this, and I think this is really important, particularly for those of you who are. I'm going to pause for a minute. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Rolf. That's absolutely hilarious. Nothing like a good pun there. Thank you for that. So a lot of folks have this question about hiking alone. And so what Adam says here is, don't feel like you have to adjust your pace for others. You'll meet amazing people at your own pace. And for most people, I know I'm speaking as a white man, right, in my middle age, right? And so I know that I can't necessarily say that you would feel safe if you're not a white dude in America heading off into the woods. But if you can muster up the sort of feeling of safeness to go out by yourself, if you're looking for people to hike with, that's the best way to go, specifically because of what Adam points out here. You will naturally join a family. It will just happen. You'll get a tramily, you'll get a group of people. And if you go by yourself, it's so much better, because you're going to naturally end up hiking with people who hike in a similar style to you. Because on the trail, you start hiking one day with somebody, and then maybe they wake up early the next morning and they're gone, and then you start hiking again. But eventually, in the first week or so, most people find a group of people who are interested in hiking similar mileages, similar days, kind of paces and times. So I encourage people to go out by themselves. In fact, if it's between going out by yourself or taking a friend you've never hiked with, go by yourself. Tell your friend you'll do a different hike, something of the sort, because inevitably what happens is you go out with a friend, and then you and your friend have different skill levels or ability levels or desires for finishing at certain paces or going later in the night. And it just creates a lot of tension. It's similar to what you may have heard people say if you went to college and stayed in a dorm, that you should make your roommates your best friends, not make your friends your roommates. And that's really kind of the idea here. So certainly don't adjust your pace for others. Hike your own hike, and think of it a little bit like a slinky, right? When you're in a community on the trail, some people will hike ahead, some people will drag back, and then it'll kind of squish, and you'll meet in a town and then kind of stretch out again. Just know that you're not going to hike by yourself ever unless you want to. That's been my experience every time I've headed out on trail, that I've made friends, I've hiked with people, and I made lifelong friends. I mean, look at the chat here. We've got folks that I've met through the trail or on trail that are just absolutely some of my best friends, right? Because we've got we've had similar experiences, or we've met through kind of being on our own and forcing ourselves to make those friends. So that's really kind of the idea here that we're dealing with. So give yourself lots of time. Know that any hike is legitimate. That's another big piece of this. Any hike is legitimate. So don't feel the need you don't have to finish the trail, right? You don't have to go all the way to Durango to have a great time on the trail. I started the trail as a lasher. So for those of you who are new, lash stands for long ass section hike. So I did the collegiate loop, and then I went back and I did Salida down to Durango, and then I went back out. But And then in 2020, I tried to do the full through hike and I left in Silverton. And fortunately, I left in Silverton 70 miles from the end, because then I went back out in 2021. And for any of you who know anything about my life story, that was a life-changing experience, quite literally. It was just a really important one. But know that any hike is legitimate. You don't have to go out and do this sort of huge miles. You don't have to finish the trail in 2 weeks. Any way you go about it, as long as you're practicing leave no trace, go out, do 20 miles over the course of 3 weeks. Who cares, right? Just have a great time and be safe out there. That's going to be key. Now let's talk for a few minutes about shuttles, because I think this is shuttles sort of with a crossover point about getting back from Durango, because this is easily the most common question that I get. How do I get back to Denver from Durango? And it is so very difficult for many people, but I'm going to offer you what I think is the best idea. And so first things first, for shuttles, know that for most towns, Colorado's culture around hitchhiking is very different than what you're probably used to, particularly if you have trekking poles, that it's very easy to get hitches in and out of town. Use common sense, follow your gut. If you don't feel safe, don't do it. You can coordinate plenty of those. You can coordinate plenty of those shuttles in advance. That's a pretty doable thing. But just know that it's not hard to get in and out of town. So don't stress about that a whole lot. What you can do as well is try to plan your trips into town near trailheads. And that's great, because often you'll see day hikers, and strike up a conversation and talk to them and say, hey, listen, if you're heading back into town, I'd love to, trade you a beer for a ride. And people will often take you up on that. And that's a pretty good way to go. Hydrate the old snack box here. Okay, let's talk about getting back to Denver from Durango. So most people are going to go Denver to Durango. Very few people go Nobo or what would that be, like Ebo? I don't know. Pause for a minute. This is my favorite new fact. The term hobo, for those of you who know the terms Nobo and Sobo, hobo comes from homeward bound. So it's a sort of a derivation of that. So people who were headed home, particularly after the wars, it's my new favorite piece of etymology. Now, going back here, Jerry, you perfectly summed it up here. Leaving your truck in Durango, go to Durango first. So go to Durango, leave your car. The airport there, I believe, is $8 a day, which is an absolute steal. There's nowhere else you can go to find parking like that. Go to Durango, leave your car at the airport, hop a plane. They have plenty of flights. It's going to be less expensive still than parking your car in Denver and then trying to figure out how to get back, or booking cars, that kind of thing. But park your car there, hop a plane back, and that way you can hike to your car. The one caveat there is that if you end up not being able to finish your hike, it's pretty tough to get back to Durango. But there is the Mustang. And the Mustang just expanded their service here from Durango to Denver. They added a single day route. So previous years, you used to have to take the Mustang from Durango to Grand Junction, wait a while, and then Grand Junction back to Denver. It was a 12-hour trip. Now it's about 9 hours as well. And so basically that's what we're looking at there, that the Mustang is a great way to go if the planes are cost prohibitive. You can certainly take the Mustang as well. It just takes a while, but it's a pleasant trip. The Mustang is pretty nice. It's not like the Greyhound trip that I took years ago. So just know that that's probably the way that I would go anytime in the future. Janet, you ask a great question here about booking hotels ahead of time or a day before you get into town. This is a really tough one because hotels, it's just tough. There are some places where it'll be a little tricky. What I can say is, as long as you're willing to spend a little bit of money, typically speaking, with the exception of the 4th of July weekend, you're probably going to be okay finding a place to stay, especially if you get into town early. What I would say is probably I wouldn't book much more than a day or two early. So if you are the kind of person who plans out and you have down to the campsite, I've seen people send me spreadsheets and say, this is how many miles I'm hiking this day. This is where I'm camping. And it takes 2 days for that plan to be completely out the window because a storm sets in, or maybe you make better miles or whatever. So basically what I would do is probably try to do it a day or two out. If you have somebody, who can do the booking for you. So I've had that before where I've either booked hotel rooms for people who are about to head into town if they've got a Zolio or something. But I would say if you can try to do a day or two, or more likely, probably the more reasonable route for anybody here is try to plan your trip into town for a short day the morning of. So, for example, if you're heading into Breckenridge and you don't have a place to stay yet, camp maybe 6 miles or so from the end of the segment so that you wake up really early and it's maybe 2 hours to the trailhead. And then you're in town by, say, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, and you have plenty of time to try to find a hotel. And if you can't, you have time to get back on trail and go a few miles in and sort of regroup and make sure that you're in good shape. What you don't want to do is try to go into town in the afternoon, late in the afternoon, maybe 3, 4 o'clock, because then by the time you get into town, if there's not a room available, you might end up with a spot where there's a room available, but it's very expensive. I've had that in Silverton. It's real common. Or you end up getting into town, there's no room available, and it's too dark or gross to actually get back out to the trail. Maybe the rain sets in the afternoon. Sorry, I'm bumping my table around all kind of crazy. So basically, that's kind of the role. I wish I had a better concrete answer for you, but know that Lake City, for example, is very difficult. Creede can be difficult to get a hotel last minute, so you might want to try to book those out, but do not book them 3, 4 weeks out in advance when you get out there. That will be a really great way to lose a lot of money on hotel rooms because you don't make it in. And it will also be a great way to sort of get your head in that space I was talking about where you have this arbitrary deadline to get to a place. So you don't want to end up in that spot. Typically speaking, though, if you get into town early, you'll be able to find a spot to stay for the night or get back to trail. I've never had an experience where I get to town and can't find a room. I've had to pay a lot of money in Silverton, but I've not had a situation like that before. Great question, Janet. Thank you for sending that over. I think we got time for maybe one more, I think. Collegiate Loop, July 20th. Great starting date, Michael. Monarch or Twin Lakes. I would say here, Twin Lakes, and go east first. And specifically, so you give the west as much time as possible to melt. If you go later than this, I like starting at Avalanche or even the Clear Creek, or is it Silver Creek? Maybe Silver Creek, whatever is just before Avalanche. Either of those are great because they're going to give you the most time at lower elevation before you get up above tree line. And you can save those gnarly climbs I mentioned earlier for the end when you're sort of more acclimated or adjusted. Other years you might start somewhere else, but I do think saving the west, whatever you do, save the west for the end. It's just so spectacular. In my personal opinion, the 80 miles of the Collegiate West and the 75 miles from Mullis Pass at the end of the trail to the end are some of the most absolutely spectacular, probably my two favorite stretches. But you're in for a great trip. That's a really great one as well. So let's take a look here at CT Mom. So CT Mom is a lasher as well, finished the trail in 2021. Keep in mind when you're planning that you won't be alone. You'll probably hitch and get rooms with other hikers, which makes it easier. And that's absolutely spot on. Specifically, if you're hiking with other people and maybe you don't have cell service, but one of them is likely to have one of those sort of transponders like a Zolio, and they might have somebody at home booking rooms. So it's really, really it's a lot less intimidating when you're on trail to book a room and get into town. That's just the way that it goes. So for a lot of folks here, you might be really anxious, and I get that way too. When I don't know for sure how things are going to work out, it can be very tough on you mentally. Know that it's going to be okay. And also, one of my favorite things about hiking the trail is focus in on the idea here that you are a problem solver. You will solve this problem, whatever the problem is. It could be a rainstorm coming in. It could be, how do I get to town? Where do I stay for the night? How do I get resupply? All of those things are tough to conceptualize right now because you're just imagining sort of probably worst case scenarios that you show up in town, there's no room, and then it's raining and you end up living in Leadville behind a pizza shop for the rest of your life. But the reality of it is more likely that you're going to get into town, you're going to find a room, you're going to have some friends who help you book a room. You might even, I've seen I've seen people who pick up hikers and then say, hey, listen, instead of renting a room, I've got a cabin at my place, and they put people up in their cabins. And I mean, it's just, there's so many ways that this works out really well for you. And just know that that's the case. Let's do a little bit of wrap up here. I will be doing a few more of these throughout the course of the season. So feel free to shoot some questions over to me on Instagram. You can also, on the chat there, you see lots of folks there. So Rolf is at Rolf Denvers. He is on the shuttlers list. He's a great resource for you. Whitney is often on the Facebook page. You'll see her answering lots of questions. So if you're on the Facebook page, be sure to ask those questions. Girl Plus Dog Adventures is great for asking and answering those questions specifically about dogs or hiking alone. And so those are really great resources. And again, be sure that you follow Tangent Trails when he goes out later this summer to do the Wimanoosh. There are going to be some really incredible videos coming out from that. So be sure that you keep up with him there. I want to thank you all as well for just tuning in tonight. This is really, I love having these conversations with you all, and I love hearing about your adventures as you go out there. So please do share with me all of them. Let me know when you're getting nervous about different things, or if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. And remember as well, click that like, subscribe, find me on Instagram. And if you haven't already, you can send me a message on Instagram. I'm still sending out stickers here. This is the original, the old school outside comfort zone stickers. I have a new one, but if you'd like one to put on your bear cam, whatever it may be, send me a message, let me know, and I will be absolutely happy to send those to you in the mail for free, just to say thanks for being part of this community. Thank you all. I hope you have a great night. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Blades. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Details as well. Here we've got Introverts on Trail. And then also, the hiking alone is just such a rewarding experience, even as an extrovert. I encourage you to try that as well. Try some night hiking, do some other crazy stuff. Who knows? Have a great time. Be safe. Practice, leave no trace. And I will talk to you all later. Thank you again. Take care, everybody.